Basi and Company is also available as a novel for children titled Mr. B, and as a novel for adults titled Basi and Company. It is also available in dialogue titled Basi and Company 4 television plays.
Airing in 1986, Basi and Company was a sitcom from Nigeria that remains one of the country's most popular shows of all time. The plot centers around the titular character Basi, or Mr. B, an impoverished man who moves to Lagos in the hopes of becoming a millionaire someday.
And as I usually say, to be a millionaire, think like a millionaire.
Each episode revolves around Mr. B's wacky schemes in pursuit of this goal. He lives in a dinky room in the slums of Lagos, constantly hounded by his wealthy landlady, known as Madam, whose vanity causes her to believe that any problem can be solved with money. The show is extremely 80s, complete with a studio audience and running catchphrases. But behind all that is a show that lampooned the Nigerian political situation at the time, showing the overwhelming corruption and greed of oil-rich Nigeria. Nowhere is this satire more prevalent than in the relationship between Mr. B and his sidekick Alali, a relationship which perfectly symbolizes the real relationship between the Nigerian state and its people. Alali is a malnourished man who lives with Mr. B, so malnourished in fact that his catchphrase is,
Mr. B, I'm hungry.
Alali is constantly exploited by Mr. B for use in his harebrained schemes, with promises of food and wealth in return. When the schemes inevitably fail, as they do in every episode, Alali remains loyal to his master regardless, and still goes on trusting him. Basi and Company was not only one of Nigeria's most successful sitcoms, but one of Africa's too. In 1987, the New York Times said, "Every Wednesday night at 8:30, an estimated 30 million Nigerians, or almost 1/3 of Africa's most populous nation, gather around television sets to see their national foibles skewered." It was lauded by all those who watched, even those it was meant to ridicule. Government ministers often praised its use of standardized English rather than Nigerian pidgin English, as it managed to single-handedly raise the country's English proficiency. Nigerian women would often pay close attention each week to how the characters Madam and Segi would dress in an attempt to copy their fashion sense. Shortly after each episode, it would not have been unusual to see women walking the streets of Lagos wearing Madam's signature, exaggerated traditional African attire. Behind the scenes, the makers of Basi and Company were thrilled at the show's success, but its creator was concerned that the message wasn't getting across and that Nigerian society would remain in its current state, and so he began devoting himself to activism. That man was Ken Saro Wiwa. Ken was born on October 10th, 1941 in Bori, Nigeria, as a member of the Ogoni people who inhabited the southeast province of Ogoniland. It was this fact that turned him into what he would become, a staunch advocate for human rights and environmentalism. Ken Saro Wiwa, like everyone else who inhabited Nigeria's southeast, was a victim of what is called corporate colonialism as a result of Royal Dutch Shell's inhumane exploitation of oil, and sought to end the tight grip they held on the country. Royal Dutch Shell began as a merger between the Dutch-owned Royal Dutch Petroleum Company and the British-owned Shell Transport and Trading Company Limited. In 1958, 2 years before Nigeria's independence, they discovered vast oil reserves and began their exploitation of the resource. Though their operations were spread across the country, none were quite as devastating as their operations in the country's southeast. Shell would morph the environment with little to no regard for its well-being, or the well-being of those who lived there. Ground was dug up and ruined in order to make way for piping which was rarely maintained and often rusted. Drilling equipment would destroy land to the point where it became uninhabitable, and oil spills were commonplace, ruining local water supplies. To add insult to injury, the natives of these oil-rich lands wouldn't even see any compensation for this damage, or share of the wealth it created. Shell would only keep the proceeds for itself and the Nigerian government, enriching themselves. This exploitation was so bad that it became a key factor in the outbreak of the Biafran Civil War, which began after these exploited lands attempted to secede from Nigeria in order to secure equality and self-determination. The exploitation would also be a key factor in the end of the Biafran Civil War, since the UK intervened on the side of the Nigerian government to preserve their revenue created from Royal Dutch Shell. In the end, the Nigerian government was successful in defeating the breakaway state, and Shell's operations were permitted to continue. Shell's crimes in Nigeria are not solely environmental either. They are in fact unimaginably worse. From its independence in 1960 all the way up until 1999, Nigeria was ruled by a series of military dictatorships. Dictatorships which were only allowed to survive as a result of collaboration and collusion with Royal Dutch Shell, who saw these dictators as the shields that would protect their profits. When you hear that, you may think that Shell merely gave money to the regime in return for protection, but this cooperation in reality was far worse. Documents released by Amnesty International reveal that Shell was instrumental in the repression of several peaceful protests. One of the most infamous of these occurred on October 29, 1990, when a protest broke out in Umwechem village. Fearing it would turn violent, a fear that was in actual fact baseless, Shell called the police for assistance. The ensuing violence was perfectly summed up in an official inquiry. It stated that the paramilitary unit which responded descended on the village like an invading army that had vowed to take the last drop of the enemy's blood. The clash that resulted caused the deaths of 80 peaceful protesters, killed by gunshots and blown up with grenades. The police then set about burning over 600 homes to the ground. Imagine you're the Shell boss who called the police. You were scared a protest might threaten you and your employees' safety. Seeing what the police then did in response, you'd probably be outraged and vow to never call them again, right? Wrong. This kind of thing happened frequently, and Shell was fully aware of the consequences of military intervention. Yet they still called them to suppress these peaceful protests. They even gave financial and logistical support to these military operations. Former Shell Nigeria chairperson Brian Anderson once said, "In reality, any operational contact with the government requires financial and logistical support from Shell. For example, to get representatives of the Department of Petroleum Resources to view an oil spill, we often have to provide transport and other amenities. The same applies to military protection." Commander of the Internal Security Task Force, ISTF, Major Paul Okuntimo, told journalists in 1995, "Shell contributed to the logistics through financial support. To do this, we needed resources, and Shell provided these." His task force was responsible for the brutal repression of the Ogoni people, which involved killings, the burning of homes, and mass rape. The violent, oppressive military regime that existed in Nigeria until 1999 was kept in power primarily due to the interests of the foreign-owned Royal Dutch Shell Oil Company. But this is merely one example of what is known as corporate colonialism, a phenomenon which continues to the present day. The small micronation nestled in the Gulf of Guinea, known as Equatorial Guinea, possesses over 1 million barrels of oil reserves as of the beginning of 2020, the 39th largest proven reserves in the world. In 2010, Equatorial Guinea provided 17% of all US oil imports and has received over $50 billion from American-based oil and gas companies. The largest of these companies is a household name, ExxonMobil. Yet, despite this vast wealth, oil revenues in Equatorial Guinea remain almost entirely in the hands of the elite dictatorial establishment, an establishment modelled in effect on the mafia due to its nepotism and unimaginable cruelty, an establishment which, rather than investing in the country where a majority of the population lacks access to clean drinking water, would prefer to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on expensive villas in Hollywood, Paris, and elsewhere. This dictatorship only survives because foreign companies will it. Because foreign companies, like ExxonMobil, profit from the existence of this mafia state. The Democratic Republic of Congo is considered by many to be the most resource-rich country in the world, yet its population remains ravaged by poverty and conflict. Corporate colonialism of the DRC began in 1960 when divided foreign economic interests between the US and Belgium, mainly regarding diamonds, caused the tension which would explode in the Congo crisis, and the assassination of its first democratically elected Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba. After that, economic interests allowed for the creation of one of the most brutal dictatorships in history under Mobutu Sese Seko. Foreign exploitation of the DRC's resources would continue until the present day, with a brief absence during the Congo Wars. Today, the DRC's corporate colonization by foreign companies, mainly driven by increased demand for coltan, a resource used in consumer electronics, has caused ethnic and tribal conflict. This is because the most resource-rich regions in the DRC, mainly in the east, are controlled by local militias and warlords, not the government, and foreign companies pay these militias to let them mine there. These militias then use their newfound revenue to commit horrific atrocities and hold back the DRC from progressing. Libya holds some of the largest oil reserves in the world, something which the West exploited until Gaddafi took over the country in 1969. In fact, Gaddafi's revolution was driven primarily out of a reaction to this unjust exploitation. What resulted was a regime that routinely violated human rights and financed chaos all over the globe. But foreign interests came back to bite when Gaddafi was overthrown and subsequently killed in an American coalition-backed rebellion. Though the reasons for his overthrow are complex, his hoarding of oil wealth was undoubtedly a prime factor. 3 years after his death, Libya was plunged into its second civil war, which is currently ongoing, and, you guessed it, foreign oil interests are playing a key role. Primarily Western countries are backing the government of national accord, with Russia, Iran and other anti-Western nations backing the Libyan National Army. All foreign backers wish to seize on Libya's oil wealth and win those much sought-after contracts. All in all, corporate colonialism remains a key driving force of conflict worldwide. But we should go back to where we began this story, back to Ken Saro Wiwa and his activism. Ken founded the movement for the survival of the Ogoni people, Mozop, which sought autonomy for his ethnic group and region in Nigeria. What he wanted was not radical, merely that the Ogoni people, who occupied the land upon which vast sums of wealth were coming from, should share in that wealth and prosper. The group was strictly non-violent, participating in peaceful protests throughout the early 90s. In 1992, Mozop was successful, and Shell was temporarily driven out of Ogoniland. But Shell did not go without a fight. They appealed to the government and pointed out an old law, one that criminalized anyone uttering words that would cause violence, especially if they spoke of gaining autonomy for an ethnic group. Shell sent out a briefing note to the government where they accused Ken of committing emotive and exaggerated attacks with the objective of raising pressure on the federal government of Nigeria. They then accused him of seeking independence for Ogoniland. This note was transparent in its intention. They wanted the government to get rid of Ken. In 1994, 4 pro-Nigerian Ogoni chiefs were murdered, and Ken was accused of inciting them. As a result, he and 8 other Ogoni leaders were arrested. They became known internationally as the Ogoni Nine. Ken spent almost a year in prison awaiting trial, during which he kept writing. He wrote primarily to a dear friend of his, Sister Magella McCarran, an Irish nun from County Fermanagh. My condition is not very bad. I have an air-conditioned room to myself and the electricity has only failed once. I can write, and only yesterday succeeded in smuggling my computer into this place. I can cook, though I cannot cook, for myself, and from time to time I can smuggle out letters. The only thing is that family members, lawyers and the doctor are not allowed to see me. He told her of novels and short stories that he was writing and sent to her many poems. Soon his trial came, and it was a sham. The new military dictator, Sani Abacha, rigged the trial by bribing witnesses. Shell also partook in giving out bribes, offering witnesses jobs in return for false testimony against Ken Saro Wiwa. The trial caused international outrage, but did not prevent all of the Ogoni Nine, including Ken Saro Wiwa himself, from receiving the death penalty.
A lot of things were becoming pretty clear towards the end, and also in the letters he received, there were a lot of people were very worried about how things were going, but in his usual nature he'd laugh and tell them not to worry, and that, look, even if it went on, that they should know that they have to carry on. And he gave a lot of courage. It was amazing to see, and he knew that he could go either way, but yet his spirit was high.
Nigerian law dictated that Ken be allowed 30 days to appeal the sentence, but after only 10, on November 10th, 1995, Ken Saro Wiwa was led to a makeshift gallows that had been hastily constructed overnight. After 5 agonizing attempts, Ken Saro Wiwa was hanged. He died at the age of 54 for the crime of opposing the corporate exploitation of his home. Shell then returned to Nigeria, where it continues to operate to this day. Since 2011, there have been well over 1,000 oil spills from Shell facilities, and there will, no doubt, be more.
I leave for Nigeria tomorrow, and the Ogoni people are now fully mobilized to demand their rights of the government of Nigeria, demanding certain things, particularly autonomy, the freedom to administer themselves, the freedom to use their resources for their own good, the freedom to control their environment and to stop the devastation of the environment by Shell, where colonialism, domestic colonialism has taken away all the rights of the people who live on oil-bearing land. It's most unusual, and it's not right, because people have lost farmlands so that oil may be found. Well, what are you going to give back to the people? Oh, did you get that?
Yes.
You got it? I thought I was rehearsing.
Yeah, it's very good. First time it's always good.
That's great. Very, very nice.
It's good.
Oh my God, I thought I was rehearsing.
When you dig deep enough into most issues faced by third world countries, you're likely to find that corporate interests fit somewhere inside. Today, corporate colonialism remains one of the largest drivers of suffering worldwide. The reason Ken Saro Wiwa's story is so important is not because of how tragic it is, it's because he is not the only victim. People like him, who only want what's best for their communities, suffer because corporations refuse to concede any ground because it might affect their profits. The West, like the US and UK, continue to colonize other countries economically through their multinational corporations. The East, mainly China, colonizes through its checkbook diplomacy, investing millions in poor countries in the hopes they won't be able to pay China back and in turn will remain loyal. Third world countries continue to lag behind in terms of development because the first world refuses to let go. Brutal dictatorships spring up in these nations either as a result of foreign economic interests or as a reaction to them, and the ones who suffer the most are the common people, the ones who have no vested interest in these companies, the ones who just want to live their lives.